William asked me to say a little bit about Farm Foundation. Many of you may know who we are. We've been around for 80 years. We were endowed in the middle of what was arguably probably the greatest crisis that this country and agriculture and rural communities have experienced, at least since maybe the Civil War, the depths of the Great Depression. And our founders really wanted an organization that would help to create a better environment for making better public policy that would help to improve the lives of people in agriculture in rural America. That was our mission in 1933. It's still our mission today. So we've been around for a good long while doing this. One of our unique aspects is that we are a non-advocacy organization. So we love advocates. People have a little difficulty getting their hands sometimes around what we are as a non-advocacy organization. It doesn't mean that we don't like advocates. We love them, but our role is different. Our role is bringing people together. Our role is exploring the challenges and opportunities that are in front of us and getting people to help explore the alternatives that we have to deal with those challenges or to take advantage of opportunities and to look at their consequences, because all of our actions have consequences. So as we look forward about 4 years ago, we were distressed by what was then an increasingly divisive tone about the role of agriculture in our society. And out of that came the Dialogue Project, which William talked about. There's more information about that overall project on our website. But there's one aspect of it that I'd really like to talk with you about today. We have 4 general areas in the project, 4 general priorities. One is goals and principles for agricultural policy. One is adaptability and resilience of agriculture. One is the role of science and technology. And the one I want to talk about today is the role of human capital in agriculture. And I really think the video we just saw really teed this up in an excellent way, because they talked about the importance of health and safety in productivity, and it's far beyond just dealing with the human toll of health and safety problems in the agricultural sector. As I open this talk, the gentleman you see on the slide was a man named J.D. Hewitt. J.D. Hewitt was my grandfather's hired man. This picture was taken in 1940. And if you looked at agriculture in the United States in 1940 or in 1950, J.D. was probably the face of the workforce in agriculture. He grew up on a small farm, a small hill farm that as you got into the 1930s and 40s, was no longer adequate to support a large family. So the children left the farm, and today I'm sure that farm is probably all trees. He went to work for my grandfather down in the valley, a 20-cow Jersey herd, and he was the face of the kind of workforce and the kind of hired men that I grew up with in agriculture in the 1950s and 60s. So I like to talk about where do we go in the 21st century. But first, I want to relate this to what you're here all about, health and safety. This is a continuing challenge. The lights are bright and I can't see, but I want to ask a question. How many of you have experienced some personal connection to a major health or safety problem for someone working in agriculture over the last 2 years? I see quite a few. I can see some hands going up. If the lights weren't so bright, I'd have a good count. Maybe somebody will get it. But I've experienced through my entire life problems, human problems, death and injury. I remember growing up with my father coming into the house with the entire leg of his coveralls gone, and he didn't lose his limb to the power takeoff. He was lucky. I remember one of the neighbors who lost both his legs in a silage blower. Another neighbor who was killed by his Holstein bull. And I remember that when I was growing up, you were expected, if you put a pitchfork through your boot, to pour some concentrated iodine on it and keep on going. But most recently, one of my friends, colleagues, and a classmate from graduate school died a year and a half ago, just 40 miles north of here, in a planting accident. His name was Cole Gustafson. Cole, maybe some of you knew Cole. He was on the faculty at North Dakota State University. A wonderful person, and it was sad to see him perish in a farm accident that we don't really know exactly what happened. So this is for me, really a personal issue. Let me come back to the workforce. Why are we at all concerned about the workforce in agriculture? A great many of my colleagues in agricultural economics have never really, since maybe back in the 60s and 70s when we were still dealing with the exodus of farm labor, with the exception of a very few people focused mostly on seasonal agricultural workers, has not been an issue that we've paid much attention to as economists. And so people say, well, the jobs in our food and ag system make the worst job lists. From a sort of a future employment view, why do we really care about it? They're going away. We hear critics on the immigration side, immigration policy side, and in other places saying if farmers didn't pay crap wages for crap jobs, they wouldn't need immigrant labor. And I hear people saying, well, labor productivity keeps increasing. We'll replace we don't need to worry about how we replace aging farmers. This is just sort of a red herring kind of issue. So workforce has not really been a very prominent thing that we've thought that much about. Why should we be thinking about it? I think it's absolutely critical to the future of competitiveness and sustainability in our system. And that's why I appreciated that video that we just saw from the Manitoba Pork Group. Our thinking about labor and human capital in agriculture is conditioned by a unique 20th century experience, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Markets for education and labor are imperfect, and thoughtful policy can improve some of our outcomes, but we have to start thinking about it. Why is health and safety important to a 21st century workforce? It's one of the keys to professionalizing the workforce throughout the value chain. Given future demographics, increased labor productivity will be essential. Health and safety are critical to that. And I'm going to talk some more about those demographics. Improving the health and safety of workers is an essential part of attracting workers from outside the farm sector, which, as you can see, we're already doing and we're going to have to do more of. So that's sort of where we're going. Let's get started. First of all, I'd just like to distinguish between labor and workforce. Labor, physical work in exchange for wages, manual or wage labor. Human capital is the stock of competencies, knowledge, social personality attributes, and so on. You can see there's a lot bundled up in human capital. It's an economist jargon term. Some people don't like it because they feel it depersonalizes people and puts it on the level of money. But I think it really reflects the context that we need to invest in people. And finally, workforce development. That's an economic strategy focused on people rather than businesses, on developing human resources that businesses and society need for future growth. How did we get here to where we are in agriculture today? If you go back to 1900, you can see in this chart our farm numbers peaked in the 1930s, actually, as some people returned from the cities back to small farms in the midst of the Depression. And our farm numbers have now really, since the late 70s or early 80s, been pretty stable. But underneath that, there's been a continuing and tremendous transition in the structure of our farm sector. And today, if you look at the numbers today, you can see that 33,000 farms produce half of our agricultural output in this country. That's really a remarkable change. For many years, people have talked about the shrinking middle. The middle is really being hollowed out. We've got growth on the small farm end and growth on the end of large farms. And so we're still experiencing this structural transformation of American agriculture. And that has had consequences for our workforce, both in terms of the needs of our workforce and in terms of where our workforce comes from. I like to say for the last 100 years, our entire food and agricultural system, the human capital, the human resources, really came from the sons and daughters of American farmers. These were the children of American farmers, of Canadian farmers, who left the farm as a part of this 20th century transformation, heavily driven by mechanical technology. And they're the children of Mexican and Central American subsistence farmers seeking opportunity. And as this transformation has gone on, we have now 10 million fewer workers on farms than we used to have. Today, about 30% of those, about 30 to 35% of those workers in a given year, it fluctuates, come from our hired workers, and the balance is still family labor. However, that's really, looking at that trend in and of itself is deceptive, because who's doing the amount of work that's done on farms by hired versus family labor has really changed. If you go back in the early 1900s, really American agriculture was family labor dominated. If you looked at it on a full-time equivalent basis, who was putting in the hours. Today, even though we have about a third of only about a third of the workers are hired workers are performing 60% or more of the actual labor on farms. 60% or more. So agriculture has become an industry that's no longer dominated by family labor, but it's dominated now by hired labor. And that has a great deal of implications for what we do on health and safety and for how agriculture is treated in terms of labor, in terms of the labor market, and in terms of both attracting employees. How are you going to get employees? Well, it's not going to be because the kid grew up on the farm and he's there. It's going to be reaching out and needing to pull in people from outside. It's also going to have an impact on regulation. And we certainly saw that a great deal of concern and debate over the proposed labor market regulations over the last couple of years. That's on child labor. That's an opening salvo. Agriculture has received sort of special treatment in terms of labor regulation because it was at one time an industry dominated by family labor. As we move more and more toward dependence on hired labor, that is going to change. Society social pressures, social and political pressures will ensure that it changes. And so we need to be prepared and thinking as we move to the future about how do we operate in that kind of an environment. If we're going to be competitive and economically sustainable, we have to do that. We're also increasingly dependent on foreign-born labor. And you can look at some of the shares of labor, of the foreign-born labor in this country, and you can see that a big share of them, maybe about half, this data is not really terribly good, are unauthorized, which puts us in the middle of this immigration debate. And William mentioned that we'd been doing some work with AGREE, and this is one area we've been working with them on. We had a symposium last summer where we took a detailed look at what's going on with foreign-born labor in this country. And so certainly as we're going to move to the point where one way or another, it may not be this year, it may not be next, but we're ultimately going to have to resolve the issue as a society, not just for agriculture, but more broadly, about how we're going to handle the status of workers that are important to our economy that are not currently authorized. And as we come to some kind of a final conclusion on that, it's going to change, I think, fundamentally what we're going to have to do in agriculture to be able to continue to attract workers. If you look at post-1986 immigration reform, the workers that were legalized at that time that were in agriculture tended to move pretty rapidly, most of them, out of agriculture, and they've been replaced over time by unauthorized workers coming in. If we change the way that process works And that's going to change on the other side of the border too, because their demographics are changing. We can't expect to have a flow of workers that are willing to take hazardous, dirty, difficult jobs for a relatively low wage. So implications for the future. Consolidation in the US and Canada continues. We can't rely on farm kids to be the core of our workforce. Fertility rates in Latin America are declining, and wages are rising relative to the US, and those societies are urbanizing. So we're not going to have access to the same kind of workers in the same numbers that we've had coming from south of the border in the future over the next 50 years that we did in the last 50. The supply of human capital for our food and agriculture system is going to be much more limited in the 21st century. So what are our challenges? Finding and developing new farmers, moving to a workforce rather than a labor pool mentality, improving working conditions throughout the system. And the question, should farms be treated differently, is going to be one that production agriculture is increasingly going to confront. We're going to have to increase productivity and value in the system, and there is going to be continuing emphasis on just distribution of that value. The symposium that we held with AGREE, looking at the role of foreign-born labor, we had farm worker advocates along with farmers and other stakeholders at that meeting, and I can tell you that there's going to be continuing pressure and issues, even once we ultimately resolve an immigration issue, on what's a just distribution of value within the system. The role of technology. Technology's played a huge role in this transformation. And that first bullet there, idiosyncratic tasks. That's more economist jargon. I'm an economist, so I had to have at least a few charts and a little jargon. But an idiosyncratic task is one where we're making decisions and doing the work is all bundled up together. When I was growing up on a dairy farm in central Vermont, my father's ability to manage herd health, to treat cows with mastitis, and put them aside and treat them with antibiotics and not get the milk in the system, to make decisions about breeding and so on, were all very much wrapped up in his being there, touching and handling every cow every day. We had a hired man, but it's hard for me to remember very many days that my father was not directly milking and working with the cows. Today, as we've moved forward, we've managed through information technology and improvements and increases in knowledge, more and more to separate these idiosyncratic tasks and to give us much more opportunity to standardize and break apart complex tasks. This is one of the things that Wendell Berry, for example, observed and still laments the demise of the mule, because it took the farmer away from understanding his land as intimately as my father understood his cows, understanding the differences from one part of a field to another. Today we have precision farming techniques, we have remote sensing, we now are beginning to get the use of some drone technology and other things that are really beginning to change and to break apart and to make large-scale the effective management of large-scale farming operations much more easily. So technology is empowering, but it also creates challenges along the way. What's the role to a safer and healthier agricultural workplace? It's going to be critical to the future. Part of it is going to be technology. Technology has changed the way we farm. It's helped to make some things much safer. I can never remember working in a tractor with a cab. The last time I really seriously worked on a farm was maybe 30 years ago or so. And as recently as that, any place I worked didn't have any tractors with cabs or rollover protection. You wouldn't, that would be pretty rare today, I think, for somebody to say, for someone to say that. Regulation is changing, and I think it's going to continue to change, and it's going to have an effect, and it's important. But another thing that's really, really important, I think, for us to think about is changing our culture and attitudes. I think that's, of all these three, that's probably the most important. As I prepared for this and as I looked at some of the posters last night, I've seen quite a bit of epidemiological research that talks about, about how if you want to look at risk factors, if someone or people in their family have been injured in farm accidents, then there's a higher probability that you will be injured and that person will be injured in a farm accident. So there are cultures within families, but there's sort of and some are more attuned to safety and to following safe practices than others. But there's sort of a general culture within U.S. farming and U.S. production agriculture that I grew up in, and I'm sure that many of you grew up in, that, boy, we got to get it done. We got to get it done now. We got to get it on time. Well, I'm not going to worry too much. I can remember as a kid, the reason my father lost the leg of his coveralls that day was because the darned PTO shield got bent and it wouldn't fasten right, so it got removed. Well, technology has made some of these things easier and lower cost to keep, lower time to keep protections like that in place, but there's still an attitude about getting the job done and doing it. And there's more than a little bit of machismo in production agriculture. It's a view of oneself as a strong person and really involved in hard work. And boy, we're really going to push the limits here. And I'm sure some of you have experienced that. And as we think about professionalizing a workforce and the needs to do that, we have to think about how do we change our culture? How do we keep the things that are really good about it, but at the same time, how do we change that culture to make it more attuned to valuing human life, human well-being, and human safety, and a little bit more focused, more than a little bit more focused on that. With that, here's our contact information, our website, and our new blog site, agchallenge2050.org, where we have about 30 folks who are posting to that blog site, writing about important, critical issues for the future of food, agriculture, and rural communities in this country. So if you get a chance, take a look at that. With that, I'd like to open the floor to questions. We've got time to take some questions. And I'll see if I'm going to have trouble. I'll see if I can get where I can. Did I see one way in the back? Oh, over there? Okay. There,
Thank you very much. Enjoyed especially your reference to the Manitoba pork video, because I'm from Manitoba. My name is Marcel Hacco from the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. Last year, in preparation for our next strategy, we actually did some outreach to some farmers and really were trying to get from them a sense of where CASA should be going. And one of the comments that came out fairly straightforward was that farmers are really sensitive about being seen as a risky place to work and a dirty place and crap jobs and all that. So we've kind of tried to make an effort within our own communications to reinforce that farming can be safe. It doesn't have to be dangerous type of thing. No, you said you were a non-advocacy group, but I guess have you dealt with how you're going to be messaging agriculture and positioning it for attracting a workforce?
One of the things that we're trying to do as a part of our dialogue project is we're holding a series of convenings we're holding a series of small group convenings that are as much a conversation about within agriculture as they are outside of agriculture. And we're trying to get people to sit down and have a conversation about the future and what are society's expectations of agriculture in the future, and to try to build a sense about the importance, among other things, of professionalizing the workforce. We're also working with a group called Agriculture Future of America to talk about how do we try to develop and create a workforce, and linking back to the college